Red versus Blue, episode 33. We've been through 33 of these, Keith. What do you think?
I think we got 33 to go. We're on a roll, Mike.
We're definitely here till Election Day, and we're under 100 days until the election, right?
That's right. And so the countdown is on.
You know, a couple of weeks ago, if you've listened to this show, that you know that I was in a real funk. Joe was still the candidate. I think I said on the air, I don't think he's going to win. And then all these things happened. And it's changed my point of view. Should it have?
Well, actually, yes, Mike. Democrats who looked at Joe Biden as dead man walking are now walking with a spring in their step because they see they've got a candidate who is competitive, who is closing the gap a little bit, and who has a legitimate chance to win the election. And that was sort of not the case post-debate for President Biden.
Yeah, and it was the debate that really sent shivers up most Democrats' spine. And then we were all in a funk, I think. And then, according to the Republicans, we stole the election of Joe Biden and put Kamala Harris in. But as a voter, as someone who voted for Joe Biden in the primaries, I'm happy it happened.
Well, you're with 80% of Democratic voters. While many people have suggested this is going to be a very high turnout election, and now it may be, with Biden and Trump at the top of the tickets, I was looking for there to be major fall off in the fall,
right,
particularly compared to the 2020 election. We saw it in the primaries, and I think a low turnout election would have been devastating, not only for Biden, but for Democrats down ticket.
And for the country, because we want people to participate.
Right.
Where do you see this going from this point? Kamala's up. She's got lots of deficits, but she's not old. That's the one that was the killer before. How do you think she's going to do? Handicap it.
Well, she passed the threshold test of being somebody who can do the job if elected. You know, nobody was going to look at Biden's economic policies or his border policies or his abortion policies if they thought he was simply too old to do the job and not mentally capable to do it. Right. That issue's gone away. And so now she's an electable candidate. I think we can say with certainty she's got the black sorority vote nailed down based on some of her speaking engagements. She has certainly consolidated Democratic support. A lot of Democratic traditional voting blocs, blacks, women, young people, are coming back to Harris that were sort of slipping away a little bit from Biden. She has improved her position with all of those groups. She's moved ahead within the margin of error in Michigan. So she's actually now ahead in one of the blue wall battleground states. She picked up about 1 to 2 points nationally, sort of across the board in her honeymoon phase here. We'll see how that goes. Right. The double haters, people who didn't like Biden or Trump, which were 20% of the electorate, are now down to 8. So she's done a good job of consolidating Democrats. She had a good fundraising 2 weeks. She raised $310 million versus $139 million for Trump. You know, the Democrats had a big fundraising advantage, and then they lost it after the Biden debate. Trump was pulling well ahead, and now she's doing well again, raising money. And then let's just point out, with the hostage release, we had our first, we'll call it August surprise. And with Joe Biden in the White House, I think you're going to see in August and September and multiple October surprises where the president uses the power of the incumbency and of the presidency to do things that will be helpful to the Harris candidacy. Trump will not only be running against Harris and her vice president, but she'll be running against Harris and the vice president and President Biden, who will be collectively working to her advantage.
I think what shocked me the most was how big a bump, or how quickly, not a big bump, but how quickly she got a bump in those battleground states. I didn't even expect that. And then she immediately tied up with him and I guess moved ahead in some of them.
Well, she did very well. She got out of the gate. There was a collective, just like you expressed, a collective sigh of relief of dodging a bullet amongst Democratic voters, a bigger enthusiasm push among young voters, black voters, women voters, and that has helped her immensely. Now, she's not completely out of the gate. There are some warning clouds. Today, the economy showed that only 114,000 jobs were generated last month. Unemployment's up to 4.3%. And let me ask, Mike, how's your portfolio the last couple of days? Because mine is certain.
today it really went down, and then yesterday it was down a little. But in defense, a month ago it was way high, and it hasn't come even close to going below where it was.
That is true. And it's unfortunate that Biden was spending the month discussing whether he was still going to be a viable candidate or not,
Right.
and wasn't really able to exploit the good economic news. But bad economic news going into the election is very bad, where
Not
you're
good.
20 points back on the economy. And that's the key issue for people. Same with the border. Now, here's an interesting sort of dynamic going on. She achieved enough delegates today that she announced to clinch the nomination. Bernie Sanders still hasn't endorsed her. He's holding out for things like Medicare for all and some of the issues that they both sort of ran on in 2020. Tomorrow in the Wall Street Journal, Peggy Noonan is going to report that apparently now Harris is for fracking in Pennsylvania. She is opposed to the Medicare for all plan. She no longer supports single payer. She believes we ought to spend more money on border enforcement. So she's going through her own little metamorphosis on the issues. And I'm sure if they're skillful about it, the Trump campaign will be exploiting sort of those flip-flops. That's sort of where you expected her to go. And we'll see if they can do it effectively going into the election.
And that's pretty traditional for a liberal candidate to move more towards the center the closer it gets to general elections, right? That's kind of common practice.
It's been typical practice historically. In more recent elections, people have doubled down on getting the base out and have not moved to the middle the way they used to sort of before the
Right.
Bush campaigns. But that's critical. One thing that is clear is that nobody is showing any love to the middle of the road Haley voter, particularly on the Republican side. They have doubled down on MAGA. Trump has doubled down on the mail vote, and those voters are sort of left to their own devices.
I was going to run this by you. We have talked before that you're obviously not going to vote for the Democratic candidate, but does this latest bump for the Democratic candidate give you hope in general for your party after this election?
I think for the Republicans to sort of break out of the cult, they need to lose, and the loss needs to be fully hung on Donald Trump so that new leaders can emerge. Ironically, this week, Mike, I read a book about the American Communist Party called Reds in 1956. The Communist Party, when it was founded in 1919, hewed very closely to the Stalinist line. They took their marching orders from Moscow. Everything they did was to support the Soviet Union. And then Khrushchev gave his cult of personality speech and basically said everything Stalin said was a lie. And there you had these true believing people suddenly having to come to terms with the fact that what they believed in, what they had fought for, what they had sacrificed for, was all a lie, was all false, was all deceitful, and it was even worse than what their opponents had said. My prediction is that today's Republicans will have a similar revelatory moment in the future when Trumpism sort of turns to dust.
Right. Speaking of Trump, he had a bad time at the Black Journalist Convention, didn't he?
Well, for a guy who had everything going for him for a month, right up into his own convention, where he sort of stepped on his own lines in the convention speech, Trump has had a bad 2 weeks. He's had trouble getting out of his own way. He's had trouble taking advantage of the media. He was on media, probably millions of dollars of free media on several networks, and chose to talk about his crowd size as opposed to the economy. It squandered resources, squandered opportunity, and frankly, it was a very, very boring speech. And he has not adjusted well to the Harris campaign. At the Black Journalist meeting, first of all, it was sort of political malpractice to let him get in front of that crowd.
What political advisors sent him there?
Well, probably him himself and his son. He said, I'll go, black people love me because I'm indicted, so they have to love me. I mean, that's sort of the simplistic and totally sort of imaginary thinking that goes into this.
Gotcha.
And of course, Trump has got to be Trump. He has no discipline. And in a very close election like this one is going to be, discipline on the part of the candidate not to make mistakes in front of a microphone, in front of a camera, in front of somebody who's going to broadcast it to all the world through 5 or 6 news cycles is absolutely essential.
Right.
And he fundamentally does not have that personal discipline.
Now, let's be honest. He was ambushed. There's no question about it. But he was not prepared at all for that sort of an ambush.
Well, all of those questions could have been anticipated. He should have understood it was going to be, a difficult interview, and he should have been able to deal with it better. Skillful people in politics from city council on up deal with that situation every day much, much better than he did.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a couple of other comments on Trump. As I mentioned, it looks like he's completely written off suburban educated women and Haley voters. He's doubling down on the MAGA base. That's why he goes through his greatest hit speeches that the rest of the country is tuning out. Now, he has consolidated the Republican vote. He's only losing 6% of Republicans. Before that, Haley was getting 15% after she pulled out. Harris did that. Harris consolidated the Republican vote for Trump. And I think by the time we get to Election Day, he'll lose maybe 3% of the Republican vote. But here's the next thing. At the next debate, if there is one, my prediction is that all of the commentary coming out of it is going to be, it looked like Trump wasn't all there, that he had mental acuity issues. Now, Harris is fully capable of doing a word salad and looking like a fool in front of the audience or dropping her G's to sound more authentic. But now the burden is going to be on Trump to make sure that he demonstrates his own mental acuity, that he doesn't, when he lies, you'll get caught in the lies.
Right.
But now, given what's happened with Biden, you have the real potential that he could come out of the debate. And frankly, no matter what he says, I think somebody's going to say this. He didn't look like he had. He was, not there. So that's sort of the new risk for him.
He's the old guy now.
Very much the old guy, the oldest candidate ever.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's talk about the one missing piece, and that's Kamala's vice president pick. How are you handicapping that one?
Final interviews are going to happen over this weekend in person. She's going to announce the choice apparently in Philadelphia on Tuesday. Most people believe it's going to come down to, first there was speculation it's going to be a governor because they sent the word out to the financial services industry, please get your money in now, because they can't give through an SEC rule to a candidate if they've got a governor on the ticket. So the stock of governors went up. Most people think the two best candidates are Mark Kelly and Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania, with most people believing Shapiro would be the better candidate. Now, here's the irony, Mike. Shapiro is the only one with organized opposition. There is a far-left pro-Palestinian faction who is spending money, who is lobbying hard, who is talking on the media to lobby against Shapiro. And we mentioned it here on this show a week ago. I said that might be one Jew too many. Well, that's what's happened. There's been an organized campaign because Shapiro has been too pro-Israel for some of the Democrats in Michigan and for some of them who are more pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas, who hold that against him, which would be, and he's also got a few more moderate positions than some of the other candidates, although not particularly, moderate from a Republican perspective, but certainly moderate for a Democrat. That is working against him. While at the same time, I think everything says he is by far the better candidate that could be chosen, with probably Mark Kelly being the cover bid.
Those would be my picks as well. And I didn't know that much about Shapiro, but now that I've heard him speak, he's an eloquent speaker. He's very good at speaking, and maybe even better than Kelly to some degree. And so I'd be happy with either one. So you think he's the guy?
Well, it's going to be a test of Harris's leadership. Is she going to listen to the far left and the sort of the pro-Palestinians and think about Michigan? Or is she going to focus on Pennsylvania and try and get a more moderate person on the ticket to balance it and go that way? And so that will be an indication of her sort of personal direction, her philosophy, and sort of her strategy for the race.
Okay, what do we look forward to next week? What's going to happen next week? She's going to pick the VP. That's one of the issues. What else is going on next week?
She's going to pick the VP. Now that she's locked up the nomination, we'll see if Trump indeed agrees to debate or whether he tries to get out of the debates.
Right.
We're going to see how the economic news is playing out, because that's suddenly sort of turned in the disfavor of the Democrats.
Right.
And so we've got a lot of stuff that's going to influence this race.
And we'll be here for you, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Red versus Blue. Subscribe on all your platforms. Visit us on our Facebook page, like our Facebook page. Give us a good review if you like the show. All of these platforms have places where you can leave a note, leave a review, and we appreciate it. And we will see you again next week for another edition of Red versus Blue.
Thanks, everybody.